Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, dear third year students. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to your course Contemporary Grammar of English. In today's lecture, I will be speaking about different things. First, we'll speak about types of the English sentence, parts of the sentence, range of operators, and what different types of operators do we have. So we'll speak about do operator, be operator, have operator. And then we will move on to speak about the major sentence elements, the units of the sentence. We will speak about objects, what types of objects do we have, and the complements, and then we will move to speak about the categories of the verb. Now, let's start our lecture. Types of English sentence. Structurally speaking, the English sentence is classified into simple, compound, and complex. A simple sentence is the one that contains a subject, a verb, and a completed thought. It can stand alone as an independent clause. Consider the following sentence. Mary is wearing a face mask. The above sentence is an example of a good simple sentence. It consists of a subject, Mary, and a verb phrase, is wearing, and an object, a face mask. In addition, it conveys a completed thought. A compound sentence is the one that is made of two or more clauses of equal grammatical importance. These clauses are joined by a coordinating conjunction. Consider the following sentence. He went to the stadium, but I went home. The above sentence is composed of two independent clauses, coordinated by the coordinating conjunction but. Each of the two sentences has a subject, a verb, and a completed thought. So the understanding of any of the sentences is not dependent on the other. Each one of them can stand alone with a complete meaning. A complex sentence consists of one main clause and one or more subordinate clauses. So the clauses that made up the complex sentence do not have equal grammatical importance. One of them is dependent on the other. The dependent or subordinate clause cannot stand alone with a complete thought. Its understanding is dependent on the main clause, which completes its meaning. Consider the following sentence. I like John because John likes me. The above sentence is made up of two clauses. One of them is independent, which is the main clause, I like John, which can stand alone with a complete meaning, and the other one is dependent, subordinate clause, because John likes me, which can't stand alone with a complete meaning unless it is attached to the main clause. The English simple sentence is traditionally divided into two parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject has the following characteristics. It is the person or the thing about which we make an assertion. It is related to what is being discussed. The subject determines concord or agreement with the verb in terms of number, So a singular subject requires a singular verb form, while a plural subject requires a plural verb form. And the subject is the part of the sentence that changes its position as we go from a statement to a question. The predicate is what we say about the subject. It is that part of the sentence which contains the verbal element. So, the predicate in the following example is the whole italicized part in red. The student read the book. So you see, now the student is the subject and the predicate starts from the verb to the end of the sentence. So the student is the subject, read the book is the predicate. However, in the next example below, the predicate is divided into the auxiliary verb as the operator and the predication. So it happens sometimes that the predicate is composed of more than one verb. One of them is the operator and the main verb and the complement. So the student is reading the book. The student is the subject, and the predicate is reading the book. So it is composed of an auxiliary verb is plus the main verb and the object, the book. So it happens sometimes that the sentence may have a range of several auxiliary verbs. In such case, it is the first auxiliary that acts as operator. Now, let's first know what is meant by an operator. The operator is the auxiliary verb that facilitates the expression of negation and interrogation. So it is that verb that performs an operation on the clause, on the sentence, whether this operation is converting the sentence from its statement state into a question, or from its affirmative state into the negative state. Consider the following examples. They should have been executed for their crimes. So as you see in this sentence, we have a long string of auxiliary verbs. We have should, have, been, and the main verb executed. So now if we want to perform an operation on this clause, of course we have to use the first auxiliary, which is the verb should, to perform this operation. So to change it into a question, we say, should they have been executed for their crimes? And to make it negative, we attach the negative particle to the verb should. So they shouldn't have been executed for their crimes. The modal auxiliary verb should is the operator in the examples above, for it comes first in the sequence of auxiliaries, and it performs the operations of negation and interrogation. If the verb phrase has no auxiliary in the positive declarative sentence, do is introduced when an operator is required for negation, interrogation, and emphasis. Look, so the verb do, and of course its other forms, does and did, can be used as operators in case that the verb phrase is devoid of any auxiliary verb. And the verb do and its variant forms can be used to perform operations like negation and interrogation and emphasis. We can use it also to emphasize our speech. So consider the following examples. They trampled the roses. To perform an operation on this sentence, we need an operator. Since no auxiliary verb is available in the sentence, we should introduce the verb do. As the tense of the sentence is past simple, we should use the past form of the verb do, which is did. So we say, did they trample the roses? They didn't trample the roses. They did trample the roses. So as you see, we use the verb did to perform the operations of interrogation, negation, and emphasis. Be operator. The verbs to be can act as operator whether they are used as auxiliary verbs or they are used as main verbs. So consider the examples. Peter is wearing a face mask. Mary was washing the dishes. The children were vaccinated against COVID-19. So you see the verbs to be here in these three examples is, was, and were. All of them are used as auxiliary verbs, so they can be used to operate on these sentences. So we can use them to make them questions and to make them negative as well. So we say Peter is not wearing a face mask. Is Peter wearing a face mask? Mary wasn't washing the dishes. Was Mary washing the dishes? The children weren't vaccinated against COVID-19. Were the children vaccinated against COVID-19? So these verbs can be used to convert the above sentences into negation and interrogation. So the verbs is, was, and were can be used to convert the above sentences into negation and interrogation. Now, if the verbs to be are used as main verbs, so when we use them to refer to a certain type of relationship, now this time they also can be used to perform operations on the sentence. So we say, for example, Brian is a pediatrician, Judy is smart, they are physical therapists. So in all these examples, the verbs is and are main verbs because they are used here to show the relationship between the subject and the complement. So in these examples, we can also use the auxiliary verbs to perform the operations. So we say, is Judy smart? Judy isn't smart. Are they physical therapists? They aren't physical therapists. Have operator. In British English, the verb have can act as operator whether it is an auxiliary verb, as in, Peter has been uploading his application documents. They have eaten too many carbs today. So in these examples, the verbs have and has can be used to convert the above sentence into negation and interrogation. So we say, Peter hasn't been uploading his application documents. Has Peter been uploading his application documents? They haven't eaten too many carbs today. Have they eaten too many carbs today? When the verb have or has are used as main verbs, They can sometimes also be used to perform operations on the sentence. Like, for example, Brian has a degree. So we can say Brian hasn't a degree. Has Brian a degree? The child has a rotten tooth. The child hasn't a rotten tooth. Has the child a rotten tooth? So we will see later that in dynamic senses, the lexical or the main verb have in both American English and British English normally has the do construction. So when the verb have is used with a dynamic sense, when it is used to refer to some kind of operation. So for example, when it is used to refer to the a process of drinking or the process of eating, so it is used as a main verb. So when this time we cannot use it to perform the operation on the sentence in which it is a present. So we have to use the do operator. So for example, he has coffee with his breakfast. This time has here refers to the process of drinking coffee. So it has a dynamic sense. Then we should use the do operator instead of using the same verb to perform the operation. So we should say, does he have coffee with his breakfast? Or he doesn't have coffee with his breakfast. Now it's time to speak about the sentence elements. The English sentence may alternatively comprise 5 units: the subject, the verb, the complement, the object, the adverbial. This doesn't mean that every English sentence should contain all these units. Of course not. But by saying so, we mean that these units are the major units to be used in the English sentence. Consider the following examples. Jump. So you see, this is a complete sentence. However, it is composed of only one unit, which is the verb. So the imperative sentence here, verb, is a verb. Jump. Okay, it has a complete meaning. The girl laughed. It is composed of a subject and a verb. John rented a flat. Subject, verb, and object. Janet is a nurse. Subject, verb, and a complement. George is upstairs. Subject, verb, and adverbial. So the above examples show that it is not necessarily for the English sentence to comprise all these units. Now let's start speaking about some of these units. Let's start with the objects. Now we say object, I didn't say object. You know why is that? Because we have to differentiate between two types of objects, the direct object and the indirect object. So consider the following examples. The boy ate the cake. John bought his daughter a cell phone. Though both the cake in the first example and his daughter in the second example are labeled object, the relationship between each one of them with its fellow elements is different from the other. In the first example, the action instigated by the verb ate, so the activity of eating, directly passes from the boy to the cake, so the cake undergoes the process of eating that is performed by the boy. While in the second example, the action doesn't pass from John to his daughter directly, but it passes through another station, a cell phone till it is received by his daughter. A sentence whose verb is a monotransitive requires a direct object only, while a sentence with a detransitive verb requires a direct object and an indirect object. We call the cake in example 1 a direct object, but we call his daughter in example 2 an indirect object. Now let's try to find the differences between indirect object and the direct object. The indirect object always precedes the direct object. So in case we have two objects in the sentence, an indirect one and a direct one, the indirect one always precedes the direct one. The indirect object is mostly a noun phrase referring to a person. So this is the structure of the realization of the indirect object. It is mostly a noun phrase. And this noun phrase is used to refer to a person. Its relationship, the relationship of the indirect object to the other elements is that of a recipient. So the indirect object is a recipient. Okay, it refers to the person who receives the direct object. So in our second example, John bought his daughter a cell phone. So his daughter is the indirect object. It is the recipient. It receives what? It receives the direct object. So his daughter received the cell phone. The indirect object can be deleted. We can delete the indirect object, and in this case, when we delete the indirect object, we change the structure of the clause from subject verb object object into subject verb object only. The direct object. The direct object always comes after the indirect object. So in case we have two objects, the direct one always comes after the indirect one. It must always be present if there is an indirect object. So there is no way to delete the direct object. It should be present when we have an indirect object. It is a noun phrase referring to things. So the direct object is a noun phrase that refers to things. So in our second example, we have what? We have a cell phone. In the first example, we have the cake. So both of them refer to things. It has the meaning of what is done for or received by the indirect object. So the direct objects in the first example, the cake, what is done for. Okay, the cake here, it is what? It means what? The thing that undergoes the action of the verb that is performed by the subject. While in the sentence in which we have two objects, the meaning of the direct object is different. The meaning of the direct object here is what is done for or received by the indirect object. So the example, John bought his daughter a cell phone. So the cell phone is what is done for or what is received by the daughter. Okay, so the meaning here is different from the meaning of the first direct object in the first example. Now we shall move to speak about complements. Of course, here also we need to differentiate between two types of complements: the subject complement and the object complement. Consider the following examples. John is a dentist. they crowned him king. You can see that a dentist, in the first example, has a direct relation to the subject John. Therefore, we call it subject complement. The word king in the second example has a direct relation to the object him. Therefore, we call it object complement. So there are different realizations for the complements. We will speak about them in details later. So later we will see the different realizations of the complements. Another element, another major unit in the sentence is the verb. And the verb should be present always. And of course, we have different categories of the verbs. The distinction between these categories is drawn according to two criteria. The first criterion, their relation to object and complement type. So the relationship between the verb and the complement or the object here all determines or categorizes the verbs into different categories. And the second criterion, whether the verbs themselves admit the aspectual contrast of a progressive and non-progressive. Now we will speak about these two criteria and the categories of the verbs under each one of them. Concerning criterion number 1, verbs are divided into two categories: intensive and extensive verbs. So these are the two categories of the verbs under the criterion number 1, which is the relationship to object and complement type. Intensive verbs are those verbs that show a close semantic relationship between the subject and the complement. Intensive verbs are intransitive. They do not require an object to complete their meaning, but they rather require a subject complement. The verbs to be and some linking verbs are the most frequent intensives. So the verbs to be and the verbs that have a copular meaning, that the verbs that copulate between the subject and the complement, we call them also linking verbs, are the most frequent intensive verbs, because these verbs show a close semantic relationship between the subject and the complement. Intensive verbs complement the subject. They tell us something about the subject. They are usually followed by a noun, a preposition, or an adjective, which tells us something about the subject of the sentence. Consider the following examples. Max became a doctor. So, you see, here we have what? The linking verb became. Here, this linking verb shows us a close semantic relationship between a doctor and Max. Here, a doctor tells us who Max is. The cat is in the kitchen. So, again, the verb is here is an intensive verb, because it shows this kind of intensive relationship between the kitchen and the cat. In the kitchen tells us where the cat is located. So it gives us information about the subject. Sam seems happy. Happy describes Sam's state of being. Again, the adjective happy tells us some information about Sam. So that's why we say that these verbs are intensive because they show this kind of relationship between the subject and the verb. The verbs here, the intensive verbs, will help us to understand the relationship between the subject and the complement. Extensive verbs. Extensive verbs are used to say what the subject is doing. Extensive verbs are most other verbs, other verbs than the verbs to be and the linking verbs. They do not have a subject complement, so they don't have a subject complement. Words or phrases following an extensive verb work as the verb's object. So instead, they don't have subject complements, they have objects. They apply to the verb, not to the subject. Extensive verbs can either be transitive or intransitive. So in the case of intensive verbs, we said that they are intransitive, so they don't need objects. However, the extensive verbs can be both, can be transitive or intransitive. So consider the following examples. John runs fast. So here the verb run is an intransitive verb. We don't have an object. Okay, so it is what? Intransitive. However, it is extensive verb. The focus of the sentence is run and how John does that. Okay, so our main concern is the object, not the subject. So we are interested in the verb, okay, not the subject. He struck the dog. Again, struck. We are interested in the what? In the subject. In the verb. Okay, and what it causes to the object. He sent me a message. And again, we are interested in the verb and what does the verb causes to the direct and indirect object in this example. As far as the criterion number 2, whether they admit the aspectual contrast of progressive and non-progressive. The verbs are divided into stative verbs and dynamic verbs. Stative verbs are those verbs that do not usually occur in the progressive. So, semantically speaking, they are used to express state of affairs rather than actions. So the verbs, if they are categorized as being stative verbs, they denote show actions. They only speak about a state of affairs. So no action is involved in such verbs. They cannot tell us about activities. They tell us about states of affairs. Now these verbs, the stative verbs, are used to speak about or relate to thoughts and opinions, feelings and emotions, senses and perceptions, possession and measurement. So these are the categories of stative verbs. The stative verbs, we have stative verbs that show thoughts and opinions like agree, believe, doubt, guess, imagine, and the other verbs that relate to feelings and emotions like dislike, hate, like, love, prefer, want, and wish, and verbs that speak about senses and perceptions, like appear, be, feel, hear, look, see, and the other, and verbs that relate to possession and measurement like belong, have, measure, own, possess, and weigh. All these verbs are stative verbs since they are used to speak about the state of affairs, and they aren't used to speak about actions before, because they can never be used to refer to actions. Do we have exceptions? I mean, do we have some verbs that can be used as a stative and dynamic at the same time? Yes, we do have exceptions, but today it is not the time to speak about these exceptions. We will speak about them later on. Dynamic verbs. The dynamic verbs are those verbs that admit the progressive aspect, which means that these are the verbs that are used to speak about actions and processes. Okay, so they have a dynamic sense. They can be used in the progressive tenses. We can use them in the present continuous, in the past continuous, okay, in the present perfect continuous tense, and the other tenses that refer to activities, actions, and processes. So, the dynamic verbs may also be called as action verbs or event verbs. Consider the following examples. The farmer trimmed the trees. So, the verb trim has a dynamic sense because it involves a kind of activity, a kind of action. So we can say the farmer was trimming the trees. So the verb here accepts, admits the progressive aspect. My daughter baked a cake. The verb bake here involves or refers to a process, and usually processes involve actions, they involve activities. So the verb bake here also admits the progressive aspect. So we say, my daughter was baking a cake. The bird is singing beautifully, and you see that the verb here is used in the present progressive, so it is what accepting the dynamic state of the verb. You remember we said something about the transitive verbs earlier. Now, and you know that the transitive verbs are those verbs that cannot stand alone. They need an object to complete their meanings. We do have three types of transitive verbs. We have monotransitive verbs, which are the verbs that require one object to complete their meaning, as in John broke the window. And we have detransitive verbs, and they are the verbs that require a direct object as well as an indirect object, as in she bought her son a computer. And we have also complex transitive verbs. These are the verbs that require an object and an object complement, as in they elected Biden president. So as you see, now all these examples have object. However, some sentences have one object, other sentences have two objects, and other sentences have an object and an object complement. Okay, this is because of what? The category of the verb. If it is monotransitive, it takes only one object. If it is a detransitive, it takes two objects. If it is a complex transitive, it takes an object and object complement. Now, these transitive verbs may undergo category conversion. Some of them may undergo the process of category conversion. That's to say, they might be converted from the category of transitive into the category of intransitive, as in the following. So, they are hunting ducks. So here the verb hunt is a monotransitive verb. So as you see, we have a subject, a verb, and an object. Now, this very verb can be converted from the category of monotransitive into the category of intransitive. So when we convert it into the intransitive, this time we don't need an object. So we say they are hunting. And the sentence is still complete, and it has a complete sense. In the same way, they might be changed within the category of a transitive from detransitive into monotransitive, as in the following examples. Professor Smith is teaching them physics. So you see that the verb teach here is a detransitive. It requires two objects, them and physics. The verb teach can be converted into a monotransitive. So we can convert it into a monotransitive. And if we do so, then we need only one object. Like when we say, Professor Smith is teaching physics. Okay? And the meaning is still acceptable, and it is complete. That's all for today. Thank you, and I hope you the best of luck. If you have any question, you may ask, and you may comment on the lecture on YouTube or on the Google Classroom.